Welcome to Draw This. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to draw a cartoon caterpillar using Corel Painter. So let's go ahead and create a new document that's 11 by 14 at 300 dpi, and you could use any size canvas that you want, really. I'm going to look under the shape tools for the oval shape tool, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have no stroke and that I have a fill color selected. And you could really choose any fill color that you want. For now, I'm just going to choose this gray color. And you turn the fill and stroke on and off by clicking on these icons here. So if it's blue, it's on. If it's black, it's off. Now when you draw with this tool, it will squish and squash unless you hold shift. So I want to make sure that I hold shift. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw one perfect circle that's going to be one segment of the caterpillar's body. So let's make it about this big so we have room to put several on the screen. And then I'm going to select the move tool and just go ahead and move that around. Now, if you want to scale this up and down, it's going to squish and squash, and then shift won't work. So what you should do if you want to redo this circle is just redraw it. So I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger, like so. Now what we want to do is we want to just create one segment of the body, including the leg and the foot, and then we can clone that, and we can make the whole rest of the body. So I'm going to rename this body, and then I'm going to group it with Control G, and I'm going to call this segment. Now within that segment group, I'm going to create a couple of layers. I'm going to call this one outline, and I'm going to call this one color. Now on the outline layer, we'll select black and the scratchboard tool, and you can draw your leg in here. I'm going to make my leg just kind of with a black fill, like so. And then I'm going to draw in kind of like a boot for the foot. Then I'm going to go to the color layer, which is the layer underneath, and I'm going to select a brown color for the boot. And I'm going to fill that in with the same scratchboard brush. And since this color is on a layer underneath the outline, you can color behind the outline. Now I'm going to go back to the outline layer, and I'm going to select the eraser, and I'm just going to clean up the bottom of that a little bit. Let's go back to the color layer, and let's add a little more definition. I'm going to add a highlight to this boot here, just to make it stand out a little bit more. Okay, let's go to the body layer, and since this is currently a shape, a vector shape, we need to convert it by right-clicking on it to a default layer, and that just makes it an ordinary layer like anything else. Now let's go ahead and turn on Preserve Transparency, and what this will do is this will lock all of the transparent area, so anywhere that hasn't been painted on will be locked, and you won't be able to paint on it. The advantage to that is that you'll be able to paint on a layer that already has paint on it and stay within the paint that's already there. So if I want to paint this gray into a different color, I can select a green for the body and use the scratchboard tool to paint. Now watch what happens. The paint doesn't go outside of that circle. If I turn off Preserve Transparency, then yes, it will go outside that circle and it'll ruin everything. So you want to make sure Preserve Transparency is on. You can go ahead and fill it in, and then you can select the airbrush, and we'll pick a lighter green that's shifted more towards yellow. We'll use the airbrush that's at almost the size of the sphere that we're shading, and that'll give us a nice gradient. Let's say our light's going to come from the top right. That's where we'll put our highlight. I'm going to shift it a little bit more towards yellow. Maybe I'll paint along the edge a little bit too to make it look more curved. And let's add a little bit of a white highlight there. Maybe we'll add a little bit of white on the bottom. Let's say the environment in this particular piece is going to be white. We'll want to reflect a little bit of the environment color. I'm going to select a darker green, maybe paint around the edges there. So now let's go ahead and select the outline and the color layers by holding Shift to select multiple layers, and let's use Control E to go ahead and merge those layers together. Let's rename that to leg. Now if we want to, we can move this leg around to reposition it. I think I'll put it right about there. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll right-click on this leg, and we'll choose Duplicate Layer, and let's move that duplicate down below the body, and we'll use the Move tool, just move it up like this. So there we go. Now we have two legs. Now let's test out this segment. Let's go ahead and close the group by clicking on the triangle there, and if we hold Alt while we have the Move tool selected and we drag, we can drag a duplicate. So let's do that a few times to go ahead and build up the caterpillar's body. And this last one will be the head, so let's go ahead and rename that layer head. And let's open that group, and let's just delete the legs. Let's go ahead and close that head layer and right-click on it to duplicate it, and let's name one of these duplicates tail. Let's move it down to the bottom of the layers. And let's use the move tool to drag it over towards the end of the caterpillar. And let's go ahead and manipulate this layer. Now if we choose free transform and we hold shift, we can scale this down to make a tail. We can go back to the head layer and we can free transform that and make that bigger. And then now if we want to reposition our whole caterpillar body, let's go ahead and hold shift and select all of these groups, and let's group the groups into a group. And now we can move that group wherever we want, and we can look back in, and now we have everything nice and organized. So let's do a little work on this. Let's go to one of the first segments and let's go to one of the background legs. And then I'm going to look in the underpainting palette because this is kind of a quick way to apply some effects. So what we want to do is we just want to darken this a little bit. So I'm just going to choose -25 for the brightness. I'm just going to select this and copy it. That way I can go to the next leg and I can just paste 25 and go to the next leg and so on. Okay, so we're done with the underpainting palette. If you can't find any of these palettes, they are all under the window menu here. Let's go ahead and add a shadow underneath. So we'll put that at the bottom of the layers and let's call it shadow. And let's make that composite method multiply. Let's select kind of a blue-gray like this, and let's use the airbrush to go ahead and just paint in right in between all the feet. Creates a nice little shadow there, and you can reduce the opacity if you do it too strong. Let's go back to the head group, and let's create a new layer above the head, and let's call it eyes. Let's select black and the scratchboard tool, and you can paint in whatever kind of eyes you want. I'm going to do some little beady eyes like this, because that's kind of the eyes that caterpillars have in real life. Let's create a new layer for mouth. Then you can give him mandibles, or you could give him a little cartoon mouth. I think I'll give it a little cartoon mouth like this. Maybe we'll change that color to something like pink. So we'll turn on preserve transparency. You can see that you can easily paint over it. This makes it easy to outline things as well. Let's turn off preserve transparency. We don't need that anymore. Let's go ahead and create a new layer for brows, and let's add some eyebrows. Now the good thing about having all these layers is that you can move these eyebrows around if you want, or you can move the eyes to reposition them, or you can erase them and redraw them if you didn't do a very good job of it. So working in layers gives you a lot of flexibility. It even makes it so that if you wanted to make different versions of the caterpillar, you could always go through and take one of these segments and rearrange it. You could rearrange the leg if you wanted to. You know, like if you wanted to, let's say, rotate the leg, you could of course do that. You would want to move the axis point up here to where it attaches to the body. And then with the rotate function, you can move the legs. Let's try that again with one of these other legs. Let's move the axis point. Let's choose rotate, and let's drag one of these corners. Let's go back to the head and let's just finish that. Let's go to the eyes layer. Let's select white and the scratchboard tool. Let's put a little highlight on the eyes facing towards the light source. Let's sample by holding Alt on our keyboard and tapping to get this green color that we have on the skin, and let's put in a couple little green spots on the eyes to make them look reflective. And then if you're done messing around with all these layers, let's do a little bit of blending in between these segments. So this is kind of a point of no return, so what you're going to want to do is just save this as it is right now, and then save a copy by doing save as, and that way you'll have one copy with your layers and one copy without. I'm making sure to save as a Photoshop PSD because I like that format the best, but you could also save as a Painter RIF. You want to choose one of these two formats because they preserve your layers, but if you're going to print or put it on the web, then you would want to choose an appropriate format like TIFF or PNG or JPEG. So I'm going to save my copy here, and then I'm going to go ahead and close the caterpillar layer, and I'm going to use Control E to just merge that whole group. Now I'm not including the shadow because I want the shadow to be separate, but I do want the caterpillar to be merged down. Now let's go ahead and group the caterpillar in the shadow by using Control G. And then now we can go ahead and freely move it around. And if we wanted to, we could put in some kind of little background, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to go ahead and finish up this caterpillar and blend it a little bit. So let's select the caterpillar layer, and let's select Diffuse Blur. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use pretty firm pressure to just scrub in the middle here and blend these pixels together. Now these don't look like they're segments that are detached from each other. They look like they're kind of fused together. But I'm really just kind of doing the middle here. I'm leaving a little bit of overlap on the edges. It's up to you if you want to do this. You certainly could leave them as they were, but I think this gives kind of a nice touch. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and add a little bit of detail and shading to this, and we can wrap it up. So on this caterpillar layer, let's choose select layer content to put a selection around this layer. Let's create a new layer, and that selection will go with us. And let's call this shading. Let's make it a multiply composite method, and we can go ahead and hide these selection edges by doing show hide selection. Let's choose a blue-gray like we used for the shadow on the ground, and we'll use the airbrush. And we can just kind of tint this a little bit here and there. We put some shadow from the head there. This just kind of changes it up and makes it look a little more organic. Now we can go ahead and add a mask to that layer, and we'll select black, and when we paint with black on a mask, it will conceal those pixels or that area that we're painting. So let's use the airbrush to go ahead and paint maybe here on the feet. We don't want there to be as much shadow. And then maybe on the top sides of each of these little orbs, we want these to still be pretty bright. So if you want to see what that effect did, you can do a before and after, and you can see that it just added a little more realism to the piece. You can of course turn down the opacity of that layer too to get a more subtle blend. So let's add a couple more finishing touches. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to call this highlights, and we'll use the detail oils for this. I'm going to sample one of these lighter green colors from the skin, and I'm just going to put a couple little highlights on the legs here. Alright, and I think we have a finished cartoon caterpillar. So if you enjoyed this episode of Draw This, make sure to click the like button and share it with your friends, and click the subscribe button if you haven't already to get updates when I release new videos. I release a new episode of Draw This every Tuesday, so I hope you'll join me again next week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.